All right, welcome everyone. It's good to see you here. We've all made it to AWE. So this is the opening session of the Khronos Developer Forum, and Khronos is proud to be hosting the Metaverse Standards Forum. So we're going to be doing a informal BOF, Birds of a Feather session. We have a few slides at the front, but we want to get to an interactive conversation and get your feedback and input as soon as we can. But we do have a number of distinguished guests here today, and I'm going to give them a moment just to introduce themselves. So firstly, let me start. So I'm Neil Trevitt. My day job is at NVIDIA. I'm the president of the Khronos Group and president of the Metaverse Standards Forum. Matt, do you want to introduce?
So my name is Matt White. I'm here representing Berkeley Synthetic, which is a research group focused on simulations and AI. I have a day job as head of architecture and engineering at Amdocs, co-founder and chair at the Open Metaverse Foundation at the Linux Foundation, and an initial chair and initial board member and chair at the Metaverse Standards Forum, leading the digital asset management working group.
Cool. And Guido?
Yeah, Guido Quaroni. I'm responsible for the engineering team at Adobe for the group that's 3D and immersive.
My name is Yu Yuan. My daily job is a mixture of venture capital investment in industrial metaverse, and also I'm running a startup tech company for next generation of virtuality. I'm also serving as the president of the IEEE Standards Association, and I'm also honored to be an initial board director of the Metaverse Standards Forum.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alan Smithson. I'm a co-founder at a company called Metaverse, and we make it easy to create 3D experiences and deliver them through the web. I'm also a founder of a company called Your Director AI for automatic AI video switching. I'm a board member at H-Star Space, a new space transport company. I'm a board advisor at a new quantum startup called Orbital Quantum, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and I'm Kavya Perlman, founder and CEO of XRSI, X Reality Safety Initiative. I am the chair for Privacy, Cybersecurity, and Identity Domain Exploratory Working Group still. Soon we will be a working group at some point. I have multiple things that I'm doing, but the list is pretty long, but I'm currently advising over 60 governments. I am a IMEG, so Interpol Expert Metaverse Group, chair for one of the ITU standards group, and also currently advising European Commission, the new Metaverse initiative, the lead of that group. So several different things that I'm doing, but I'm so honored to be part of this particular group. This is very unique, and we'll talk about it.
Cool. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time for being here today. I know it's busy for everyone here at AWE. We're going to make this interesting, we hope, for everyone. So we have a short agenda. I'm going to spend just a few minutes giving an introduction to the forum. I know some folks here haven't come across the forum before, but then we're going to ask the guests here to give their short perspective on why we need standardization for the metaverse. Then we're just going to open it up to discussion and questions, and we hopefully can keep it interactive, and then we'll go down to the rest of the show. So, and for the panelists, there are 3 mics there, so you can figure that out. So let me just introduce the Metaverse Standards Forum. So the first question that people normally ask us when they hear we're part of the Metaverse Standards Forum is, oh, finally, someone who must know what the metaverse is because you're standardizing it. And then we say, well, we have no idea what the metaverse is going to be either. But we do know it's an interesting area that many companies are paying close attention to, and I think rightly so, because it's a bringing together of multiple disruptive technologies together. AI, GPU acceleration, XR, Web3, networking, 5G, and everything that's going to follow. You bring all these disruptive technologies together, something interesting is going to happen. I think we're at kind of the Netscape browser moment in 1994. It's hard to know where it's going to go, but it's something interesting is going to happen. Are you going to be disrupted, or are you going to be the disruptor? And if you're going to get all these technologies working together, then we need interoperability. And the best way to get interoperability is to have interoperability standards. Also, a lot of people think that the metaverse potential will be most fully realized when we can break down the barriers between individual silos, applications that don't talk to each other, and have a much larger networking effect of spaces, worlds, applications that are communicating using the connectivity of the web with the immersiveness of spatial computing. And that needs interoperability too. And many people also think that the metaverse could be an evolution of the web, bringing immersive spatial computing to the web. And that, of course, the web is an open platform entirely based on open standards. So whichever way you come towards the metaverse, interoperability standards are a foundational element, not just a nice to have. But this is a platform in scope that we haven't attempted before. We're going to need a lot of interoperability, and that means we need a lot of interoperability standards from dozens, maybe hundreds of standards organizations. And we haven't before had the opportunity to bring all of those standards organizations together into one place, and that's the simple idea behind the Metaverse Standards Forum. It's a venue for cooperation between standards organizations and to have a conversation with the larger industry. So the Metaverse Standards Forum is about a year old, and the key thing, if you remember nothing else from my talk here, is that we're not another standards organization. We don't create standards ourselves. We're trying to help accelerate the mission of all the good standards organizations and advocacy organizations that already exist in the industry, but giving them a chance to get wider input and to get wider visibility for the work that they're doing. So we want the forum to be a channel by which we can flow use cases and requirements and interoperability testing, test beds, all kinds of pragmatic short-term projects to help the standards organizations produce the standards that we need sooner. We're deliberately not trying to be a forum that tries to predict what the metaverse is going to be in 20 years' time. We're trying to find interoperability projects that move the needle today, creating a wavefront of short-term business opportunity for everyone involved in the metaverse, and that'll give us the momentum forward. So we're currently up to 2,500 member organizations and counting. It's very diverse. I put some of the better-known names on the left-hand side. People keep asking me whether individual companies are members. I say, I have no idea. I can't keep track. But no, we do have a wide participation, which is great. It shows that there is an interest and a commitment, I think, from many folks in the industry for basing the metaverse on interoperability open standards. And it is a chance to get this broad input and broad visibility. And also, it's a thread of continuity, because as individual companies dip in and out of the various technologies, as the hype cycles go forever, as they always will, an aggregate of companies working together can provide a thread of continuity for forward progress. So without knowing what the metaverse is and having so many members, the potential for chaos is pretty high. So we've taken, hopefully, a thoughtful approach to how we decide what we should do. The first thing we did was poll the members to find out what they wanted the forum to focus on, what were the biggest interoperability problems or the biggest opportunities that interoperability could unleash. We immediately got a list of over 200 topics. They fairly naturally grouped into domains, and we let the membership upvote and downvote the domains, and so this is the latest prioritized list. Privacy, security, and inclusion came out number 1, and Javier will talk about that. Then interoperable assets and avatars, real virtual world integration, digital twins, identity, education. XR is there too. This is AWE, so we need to talk about XR. It's a pretty good list. Not too surprising, except a pleasant surprise that security and safety came out number 1. And then the third step is to produce working groups, gather interested members within the forum into working groups to execute the projects to help forward progress in each of those domains. So I'm not going to read it out, but this is the pipeline of, we actually call them domain groups because they're either exploratory groups before they figure out their charter, or they're working groups once they start executing their charter. But they're all working within one of those domains. And we have a pipeline. Anyone can brainstorm. The orange ones down at the bottom, then they become an exploratory group where we figure out the charter, and then they become approved, and they start executing their projects. And it's the same kind of list. So we're creating the Metaverse Standards Register, which is a database of organizations and publications in the metaverse, to domain groups that are focused on assets. And we have Guido and Matt to talk about those, digital twins, networking, and 3D web interoperability, which is another interesting area. And I'll wrap up here, just the organization. Because we're not a standards organization, it's a very low barrier to joining. So we welcome any organization who wants to join. It's free to people that just want to participate in the domain groups. There's no NDA. All the information coming in and out of the forum is public. Because we're not creating standards, there's no IP framework, so it's much easier to join than joining a normal standards organization. We have just become an independent, incorporated non-profit consortium. We were bootstrapped by the Khronos group, which is one reason why we're sitting here in Khronos' Dev Day. But Khronos is proud to have helped bootstrap and now set off the forum as an independent entity on its own voyage. So now we need membership dues to sustain the organization. It's scaled from $50 to $10K for large corporations. So we hope the fees won't be a barrier to participation. And the members who do pay, we call them principal members, they can also, of course, participate in the domain groups, but they also get to participate in the oversight committee, which oversees the domain group pipeline, and get to participate and vote and stand for board of director positions. So that's it. It's a quick summary, and hopefully you have questions so we can talk about that. But now, before we do that, I'd like to hand it over to the panelists. So the magic clicker.
So let's talk a little bit about this interoperability group. We picked USD and glTF not because we're saying those are the only two standards, but it was the two that are becoming really emerging. And when we have an initial conversation, it seems to be the two standards that really are defining authoring 3D and also consuming and delivering 3D content. And so we thought, okay, it would be good to start having conversation because we see how this may evolve. So the group has been really organizing. First of all, a lot of focus has been organizing sessions to learn and share among the different participants. Because the first thing is to really understand the problems that people are having, what problem we want to solve. And at the same time, also some presented even alternate solution or other standards into that mix. And then was also gathered the requirement, what does it mean to have a good interoperability between those two standards? And what does it mean, again, authoring phase, delivery phase, and consumption? And so we just went through different use cases, as you can see on the slide. It was all about how do we define, how to define scene, static or dynamic scenes, how we do, what is about aggregation, what is the role of like material, how to do editing and collaboration and real-time collaboration. Now, the group is not about the specification and the standard itself. It's just to, again, understand the problem and see, what use cases will make the most sense to look into, differences, similarities, and help the conversation to move forward. And again, one big topic has been, how do we make sure we do a lossless transformation between the two as much as possible? In a way, sometimes it's not really possible, because what was the point of if identical, then why one or the other? Because in fact they may serve two different purposes. They may not be completely lost, but at the same time we want to avoid to like, oh, you called this way, you called that way, or maybe your parameter range is 0 to 1, the other one is minus 0.5 to 0.5, things like that. We want to have a sense about how much we can at least outline those differences. And so the two bodies responsible for evolving these standards can look into it and see, okay, maybe we can do a revision of those so they're more aligned. And so ultimately to make it easier to do the interop between the two. One idea that is floating right now is to really see how do we get the ultimate, like, okay, you have an asset represented in one way, you just transfer into the other representation and transfer back, and then you see how much comes through and how much is not, and understanding if that's okay or not. Like, geometry should be pretty much lossless, a material should be lossless, but maybe some other concept would be too complicated and maybe not worthwhile to make it lossless. And that's exactly because we want to avoid that one becomes the other necessarily, and instead see how the two can complement each other. So there's a number of investigation happening right now. Again, like I said, there's looking at the two and what are the use cases and the conversion between them. And two areas that are really active right now is the exploration around material representation. Again, in so many formats, so many standards over the years, there's been sometimes a standard had also carry a specification, a schema for materials. And actually, the more this is evolving, the more we're looking at, would be nice if glTF and USD did not necessarily define a standard for material, but there was some other material standard out there that we just can support them for transport and authoring and consumption. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. Is it Material X, that is another open source project in the Academy Software Foundation? Can Material X be the standard by defining how we define materials, and then using glTF and USD in whatever capacity they serve their best to adopt these standards, versus having the glTF PBR model, the USD PBR model, and some other format PBR model, try to kind of divide and conquer a little bit to simplify the problem, and as much as possible. And the other one that is really quite active now is the simulation. When we look at the metaverse and the future dynamic worlds, is so key to have a clear understanding how you define the physical properties if you want to run simulation. Now, it's going to be still quite difficult to have simulators that behave exactly the same way, but at least we want to get some amount of understanding what are the basic principles. In some people like refer to in a way the metaverse is if it's become a little bit of a mirror of a digital mirror of the world. You want to have some rules and laws of physics so you can have like predictable motion and predictable behavior. And so that's why we're trying to get. And again, more will come. And actually, we're also trying to not try to tackle too many things at once and just do a few of them and see if we can come to some good recommendation and submit those to the Khronos group and to Pixar and on the USD side and potentially even other standards out there. And that was my quick update.
Cool. Thank you, Guido. And I hope you're storing up your questions. We can let all the panelists say a few words, then we'll open up the Q&A session. So yeah, the next is Kavya. Thank you.
Cool. First of all, I think we should all maybe do a round of applause for what an inclusive forum Metaverse Standard Forum is. Every feedback that I have ever given to the Metaverse Standard Forum board, members, leadership has always been incorporated, if denied or adjusted, for very valid reasons, and especially inclusion. So thank you, Neil. I really, really appreciate that. So with that, I'm the chair for Privacy, Cybersecurity, Identity, Exploratory Domain Group. Update is that this is a gigantic scope. And we are still kind of figuring out what all are we going to address. But few things that we've established. Privacy. So far we know, based on, and I have to say thanks to Meta's representative for raising a very valid question there. You can read the three major things that we are kind of tackling. But the key point that was highlighted within the scope of this privacy as a topic was traditionally privacy has been seen as something companies do because they are told to do so. And at Metaverse Standards Forum, organizations have the opportunity to actually not only lead with privacy, but also teach the regulators what privacy should mean when it comes to creating this new evolution of the internet. Because truth is, they're struggling. And an example I'd use is back in 2018, when I was the head of security at Linden Lab, GDPR came about. GDPR came about 25th May 2018, it became effective, and everyone was going crazy, including legal, because this 200-page document could not help us figure out what are the engineers supposed to do, what am I supposed to do as a head of security, what tooling should I give to delete what kind of data. We had unstructured data, we had structured data. So what's happening is there is a disconnect between the laws, the regulatory aspects, and especially standards. It took so many years. Just now, privacy by design is adopted at ISO as an ISO standard, just like this year. So this is where we have the opportunity, and we're trying to scope it out so that we can kind of operate more like the next aspect. Sorry, I'll go back a bit. We kind of want to operate more like cybersecurity industry, which is what my expertise is. Cybersecurity industry does not wait. We get an attack, we respond, and we actually do threat intelligence sharing with banks, with all kinds of groups. And I think that's how we should be operating when it comes to privacy. And this is our opportunity. And I really, really appreciate that 200 plus organizations are kind of buying into that thinking. So hopefully we'll get to scope and then overall. Now, next one, the scope identity. While you can read the 3-4 things that we are trying to do, and there may be a little bit of a disconnect, the cybersecurity, it should be cybersecurity identity. So anyhow, identity-wise, what we want to do is we could be bringing people together to develop a standard and say, oh, self-sovereign identity. But tell me how many groups are going to buy that. So we don't want to actually develop or help develop. Identity-wise, this is very personal to me. If we lose identity, it could literally lead to genocide. And so what we want to do identity scoping-wise, we have now access to so many global groups, including European Commission, ITU, Interpol. There's a new group that was spurred up in Japan. So through Metaverse Standards Forum, we want to help them assemble and get to a reasonable identity that could be adopted globally, that sits very close to the tech stack, and that actually protects human beings that are different, that are minorities, that so that we don't have those adverse outcomes. And lastly, cybersecurity. There may be a little bit of mix-up on those activities, but I'll create better slides afterwards and we'll share it with you. But cybersecurity-wise, again, cybersecurity does, in my opinion, a great job. We do per second, nanosecond intelligence sharing. But what does cybersecurity really mean when it comes to the metaverse? In 2018, XRSI's senior advisor discovered novel cyber attacks that you could actually move a subject in virtual reality. You could literally drop the safety boundaries. So while that kind of a scope to address from the offensive and defense perspective will take some time, what we're trying to do is we're trying to first invite the cybersecurity industry key players like CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, and people should come to Metaverse Standards Forum to start discussing the defense, the offense. We already have OWASP standard, any developers in the room, open web application standard protocols. So like, why don't we utilize them to, one, help the other standard groups within the Metaverse Standards Forum that are developing other things. So we learn from them, we advise them how to make cybersecurity, how to make secure and safety and privacy by design. So there are a lot of things that I talked about, but here are some things that are not necessarily privacy, identity, cybersecurity, but they're so interconnected, but we can't just leave them out. And you'll see the blockchain piece is highlighted because it's still not yet finalized within the group, whether we're going to take it sort of interconnected in scope or not in scope. And I'm not going to read all of these things out, but they're kind of obvious if you look at it, you know, authentication, ownership, child safety, et cetera. What's out of scope? Because, you know, sometimes one could say, hey, we need cybersecurity, privacy, identity for maintaining virtual economies, but sorry, we're not doing that. And this is just for 1 year. So these are the things that we have gotten so far. Then I want to mention to you what's really going on is this is where we are. We started in September, end of September. We took a lot of time to get some proposal, like this is what we want to do. And now we are taking really sweet time, I would say, to propose a working group charter. And the reason why we're taking so much time is because once we get started, we don't want to look back. We just want to keep moving forward. And that's why. And we are 200 plus organizations that are trying to provide their perspective. They have a huge stake. I mean, privacy is a thing that has led companies to have billions of dollars of fine. We don't get this right. This is a huge business liability. And that's why it's taking so long for us to try to scope it appropriately so we could hit the ground running and then get started. So thank you all. And I encourage you all to join this group too, because even if you're just sitting there for half an hour and getting the emails, as an observer, you might learn things. It might help you think like, okay, maybe I should tell my developer, or maybe as a developer, I should do things sort of differently. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavya. You're always the best advocate for the forum. Thank you for that. So next is Matt, who's chairing yet another domain group.
All right, I'm going to keep this short and sweet, but I do appreciate what Kavya's group is doing. We actually baked in ethics, diversity, equity, inclusion into and privacy and security into our core principles, right? And so that's reflected in our work here. Now, I'm not going to get too far into what digital assets are and digital asset management, but fundamentally, we're sort of viewing, of course, everybody has a different view of the metaverse, but ours is that there's environments and assets, right? And so we want to kind of bridge that gap and ensure that digital assets are as a fundamental part of the metaverse, that those assets have ownership, attribution. There's areas of privacy and security and confidentiality around those two. And then, how do you move assets between virtual worlds? How do you ensure that somebody doesn't, take your asset? How can you monetize your asset? There's just a lot of, it's a pretty broad domain, right? And so the work that we're doing is really thus far centered around, we've been running a speaker series, and so we've been bringing in speakers to talk about what they're working on in their particular domains within their standard SDOs and other organizations. And then we do have like a 24-month schedule that we're executing on, so we're well into that now. We are working through identifying use cases. That's our next task, which starts in 2 weeks. And although it is a very broad domain, we're going to try and identify use cases. The thought is that we provide these use cases to other organizations that are working in this space and provide some value, because fundamentally we're not designing the metaverse, we're not architecting it, we're trying to provide value to other SDOs and other groups. And so, I think the next set of projects here, and I will say one thing on the blockchain topic. We have representation from folks that are, very adamant about blockchain and, other decentralized technologies. There's others that are very adamant about centralized technologies. And then, you may have folks in the middle that prefer federation, right? And so we're not trying to solve that. We think that the metaverse can accommodate for any of these technologies. If somebody wants to use a cryptocurrency, if somebody wants to attach a digital asset to a blockchain, if somebody wants to store in a central database, it shouldn't, we're not trying to dictate how that works. We're just trying to ensure that we're looking at this from a very open perspective, right? And so with that said, I think I will wrap up.
Cool. Thank you. I think you're next.
Okay, so thank you for this opportunity to give you an update about IEEE's efforts in Metaverse standardization. So IEEE, as you know, is the world's largest, literally the largest professional organization, being well known for publications, conferences, but we are also a very important SDO, and we have been collaborating with Metaverse Standards Forum from the very beginning, and I'm very proud to be here. So regarding IEEE's Metaverse standardization efforts, as many of you have already know that we have been organizing the IEEE Metaverse Congress series, which is the purpose is to provide a comprehensive and a global view and a timely update for Metaverse related topics. So as you could see, at the very beginning, we were addressing metaverse definitions, and then later we started working on discussing what's the decentralization versus centralization, those kind of topics. And the latest sessions, we were addressing the debate between AI and the metaverse, so those kind of things. And we also have some projects literally, explicitly named after metaverse. We have the 2048, which is the standard for metaverse terminology and taxonomy. We have 1716 and 1716.1. Both are about ethics related to metaverse. We have 3812.1, which is about identity framework for metaverse. And in addition to standards projects, actually we have another program, we call that Industry Connections Program, which means those kind of efforts which are, we call that pre-standardization, post-standardization, or core standardization, but standardization itself, which means standards need to be developed in working groups, but anything else around the standardization could be conducted in the so-called Industry Connections Program. So far we have two programs named after metaverse. One is about persistent computing, talking about how to enable a persistent virtual world. And another one is about the decentralized metaverse initiative. So we believe decentralized metaverses and the centralized ones are going to coexist for a long time, but we want to make sure that decentralization will happen in the right way. We also have a whole bunch of other, we call that metaverse-related projects. So we have been maintaining a comprehensive list at the webpage metaverse.ieee.org. So our staff, particularly Sri Chandra, he's sitting over there, he and his team, we have been maintaining such kind of a comprehensive list of metaverse-related projects on the IEEE, which may or may not literally named after metaverse. So lastly, we are preparing to launch a new program. We call that MASA, Metaverse Acceleration and Sustainability Association. The purpose is to accelerate the development. So we see opportunity that along with the recent advancement of AI and many other things, we see an opportunity on the horizon to accelerate the development of metaverse technology, ecosystems, and the markets we want to make sure it will happen in a sustainable way and also contributing to the greater sustainability. So in this program, we are going to deliver like roadmaps, standards, of course, and some conformity assessment, open source reference implementations, pilot programs, and addressing diversity and inclusion, of course, and also digital assets pool and exchange to support the ecosystem. So I'll stop here. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Thank you. You and Alan, last but not least.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would just want to say that I'm really honored to be here, and I'm taking a different view of this because we actually build a game engine, and we called our company Metaverse in 2016, and ever since, people are spelling it wrong. Can you just fix that for me? But in all seriousness, we grapple with this because, we have clients that build stuff, in Rhino, they build it in Blender, they build in Maya, they build in, maybe they're taking 3D scans, they're using volumetric capture, they're using, LiDAR sensors now. There's a myriad ways to create 3D models, and because of the lack of standards, right now, we've kind of had to build a one-size-fits-all. So you take a glTF, drop it in, FBX, OBJ, whatever it is you drop in, we convert it in the back end and kind of give you our own. We had to build our own 3D model called a C3B. And the reason we did that is so that we could have a one-click publish to all devices. And so, what we found in the industry and our tagline is we make it easy to create 3D interactive experiences on the web. And we really focused on training, marketing, and retail, so enterprise applications. And one of the things that stuck out to me was that, strangely enough, clothing is made with, Clo or Browseware or these companies, and they can export to Alembic files or FBX files, and then you have boats and shoes which use splines, and so only boats and shoes seem to be using those things, and then you have CAD models for buildings. So we have this kind of massive quantity of these things, and looking at the XR Standards Forum here or the Metaverse Standards Forum with all of these great members coming together, it's really cool to see because it's groups like the IEEE, it's groups like Kavia's coming together, Adobe, and then you have like smaller companies like us that are saying, okay, well, how do we get involved in this? And it's been very welcoming. We were welcomed into a bunch of different groups, working groups, and I think just the fact that people are willing to pick up the phone and talk to you about these things and jump on these calls weekly, and really, everybody's doing this, and they're not doing it because they're getting paid for it. They're doing it because it matters and it makes a big difference. And so one of the things, if you kind of look at XR API standards here, Khronos Group has done a good job at kind of, establishing, OpenXR and we've got WebXR, WebGL, all these different standards. But who was talking about, was it Matt? You were talking about glTF and USDZ. These are, standards that, Apple's gone full USDZ and everybody else went glTF. So is there a way in which they both work together, or should we just pick one? Is it like VHS versus DVD here? And I think this is something that we do need to work out as an industry, because if I buy a digital asset, I should be able to take it with me and carry it through the internet. And we'd never had that before. When you go to a website, you don't really take something with you. You just go to a website, you close the browser, you go to the next one. But with the metaverse, you're going to be, instead of closing a tab and opening another one, you're going to be going through a portal, and it'll be a seamless experience where your avatar just bounces between places. We do this portal crawl called the Meta Traversal, and we go in all these web-based kind of 3D worlds, and you go from one to the other, and your avatar changes all of a sudden. You're just like, oh man, that's not it's not what we want. So having these standards are really important as we move from like a Web 2, if you would, or a web where we scroll and watch videos, to a web where we walk around inside of it. And that can be through VR, AR. It can be, the internet that we go into, or the internet that comes out to us. It can be on a phone. It can be on a tablet. It can be in a VR headset or a pair of AR glasses. It doesn't matter. If it's delivered through the web, it's to all devices. And, this is what we're kind of dealing with here. And there's more. There's hundreds more. But, like, how do you deal with this as a developer? And if you're building something for clothing, for example, how do you make sure that the way that it moves on an avatar in Fortnite or Roblox? Well, Roblox is different. It uses a whole different thing called voxels. Crazy. So you've got this kind of wide range of ways to do the same thing, And we got to come together and pull this together into something that doesn't look like this, that maybe is even two would be great. And then, of course, you have all the platforms for building this. And each platform has a way to, like Blender, for example, you can export to probably a dozen different formats. So working with the actual, platforms that you're building the assets on, whether, you're building from scratch or you're actually capturing a world using LiDAR or something like that is really important. That's really what I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to leave you with that. The fact that, having all of these different ways to make 3D objects and then ways to use them and distribute them, I think this is really important that we come together and have these discussions. I will leave you with this. We just launched a thing called the Starburst Juicyverse. And if you go to starburst.com on your phone, you can actually, or on your computer, whatever, it doesn't matter. We have one-click publish to all devices, but you can try the Juicyverse. And I can tell you, right before we launched it, Apple changed something on the web and broke it all. So we had to go and fix it. So things like this are really going to be helpful when people are building the 3D web at scale. You can't just go change something, constantly, and all of a sudden, half of your pipeline doesn't work. So it's really important. But if you want to try it, it's just starburst.com. It's super cool.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you to all of the presenters. Quick round of applause. So, questions. So we have just about half an hour. We can open up to any questions. I have a question for the audience first. How many folks here are members of the forum? Can you raise your hands? Cool. Some? Okay. But some are not. Why? XRA is a member. Do you want to say a few words about what XRA is doing? Yeah?
Thanks, Neil. We're very happy to have been, part of this whole organization from the start. It's been great working with Khronos Group and to get this off the ground. It has been super impressive to see how big the group has become, how quickly, and how much of the ecosystem is really out there. I think that's been a big measure of the energy of the XR industry writ large. XRA is a trade association, and we do advocacy and best practice development for the industry focused on the enterprise, taking everything that we've learned and bringing it and elevating all the use cases in healthcare, education, driving for accessibility, and thinking about accessibility by design and feature sets. And so we're really excited to see what the Metaverse has been doing, and we're happy to continue to beat the drum and be part of the effort. Thanks, Neil. Appreciate it.
Of course. No, it's good to have you here. And, again, to reiterate, because people have, the forum is kind of weird. No one's ever tried to do this before. Have this layer of cooperation over all the existing organizations doing great work. And so, we exist to help you. That's the whole message here. So, hopefully we're figuring that out. So, any questions from anyone in the group? Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Oz Sultan from XRSI and Parallel Worlds. One of the things that we've been looking at, and you really articulated this with like the number of files and standards and going to Phygital and all of this stuff. With standard tech, we have an OSI 7-layer model, right, for how data flows and how we understand this. But now we have this complicated structure where like AI might be middleware, other pieces of this might be middleware. There's all this variegated questions about like the utilization of blockchain inside of this. Where do you guys kind of see the standards matriculating inside of the next year or two? And what's the best way for companies to kind of like build forward into that?
Where do we see it going in the next year? I can give you what I would love to see. I would really love to see us figure out a way and to get rid of some older model formats. Like, how can we get rid of the OBJ? I don't know. Can we? Can we push everybody to glTF? Can we push everybody to USDZ? And maybe we can use glTFs inside of USDZ as a scene descriptor. I don't know what that looks like, and that's why we have these working groups. That's why we're all trying to discuss this and figure it out. I would love to get rid of all of the other formats and just pick something that we all agree to and that works and that can, have a texture file, and it can also have a animation file, and it can have a video file inside or audio. So we kind of have to figure all that out. I mean, it's the Wild West right now, and every company, is building their own standards. And Adobe, graciously has been helping build all of these standards as well. And Khronos Group is leading kind of from that standpoint. But I mean, even if you go on Khronos Group's main webpage, there's what, a dozen standards on there for all sorts of different things. And so how do we, is it going to be open XR? Is it going to be web XR? Is it going to be web GL? Is it going to be open GL? Is it going to be, I don't know. Come on, somebody help me out here.
I mean, there is an interesting thing that if you look at, in the past, a lot of formats were made also by, software was written, they have their own formats, and then they say, we want to make it open, but really is driven by a company. And I think and over time, it was seen as a competitive advantage to say, well, I'm lock everybody into my thing, so you need to buy my software, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a change now. Is becoming more. This is actually interesting. I had a very interesting conversation within Adobe as well, because like, what's the difference about, especially in a subscription model? What does it mean? Like, well, if you stop subscribing to a software, can you still open the data that you work on? No, you gotta keep subscribing to keep it open. And so right now, the tide is changing, where companies are seeing the value, where it's actually the competitive advantages and the quality of the software, the design and the workflow, and actually it's the opposite, when you look at the file formats. And so my hope is that over time, there'll be start to converge. It may not be the right thing even to say it's one solves them all, because you want to have innovation and change and a few opinions out there. But the hope is that there's going to be not far from now that enough requirements also for quality and scalability, where some of those formats will just automatically will get out of the way. And so that's actually where we're trying to have this conversation, to try to avoid siloed conversation between entities that do their own thing. Perfect example is USD was built mainly for high quality rendering on render farms for 50 hours renders, maximum level of quality. glTF is the opposite, real time. Those things are tried to converge, and it's good to talk about those versus like, well, you do your thing, we do our thing, and then people are in the middle trying to figure out what to do there. So obviously, I'm not have an answer as a solution, but even just engaging this conversation and companies willing to, it was really refreshing to see, a big company like Adobe say, absolutely, let's go adopt those standards and not necessarily lock our customer into something specific. So the hope is that by this mentality, we'll, get rid of some of the old stuff. It's amazing how, there's another thing, is simplicity. OBJ, like, why people keep using OBJ? But at the same time, it's so simple. I was like, and that's a problem, for example, like USD is a perfect example. Like, it's super powerful, but it's kind of a big library. And it doesn't run on the web. Sure, it could, but it's kind of heavy. And so those are, again, the goal here is to make sure that we have this open conversation and companies are willing to open up and discuss these things versus keeping it a guarded thing like it used to be. So I'm kind of optimistic in a way.
I would also like to add that we may also need to see some market driving standards, if I can put it this way. So particularly, we will need some terminology and taxonomy standards. An example is like autonomous driving. In the autonomous driving industry, everybody is using SAE standard. So there are several levels of autonomous driving. So everybody is talking about, hey, my company is developing a level 4, and your company just delivered a level 3, something like that. So nowadays, we see lots of confusions when we discuss metaverse, particularly like if some guy is talking about the industrial metaverse, another guy is addressing the consumer-oriented metaverse. They are basically talking about completely different things. So we also need some definitions, terminologies to define different levels, types, and profiles for different metaverses, set up the roadmap for the industry, so to facilitate the discussion. And also, I think for non-technical perspective, like ethics, which will also be needed probably before the technology is mature enough. Nowadays, recently we see lots of discussions about AI ethics. So fortunately, IEEE, we have started standards for AI ethics many years ago, and we have developed several standards for that. I believe those kind of efforts will also be needed for metaverse, particularly. Many people started being concerned about those kind of issues may happen in metaverses as well. So we need to develop those kind of non-technical societal standards to relieve those concerns.
Yep, Matt?
just add that, the most successful global network-related projects have been the result of incubation, right? The internet was incubated, the web was incubated. These were, and with the metaverse, we're not incubating, right? There's a lot of different technologies involved. There's a lot of different people involved, a lot of different views of what the metaverse should be, competing commercial and nonprofit interests. And so a huge value in the forum is bringing all these people together, right? To talk and have these conversations. But to answer your question, I think that, the proof is in the pudding. When standards aren't standards on day one, right? And so if companies are going to build projects, whether it's a big tech company or small tech company, or even some startup, but these projects have to be sort of contributed into the public domain, right? They have to become open source projects that will have open specifications that will then become open standards. That, I think, we'll see these projects start to sort of accumulate and start to get more interest as we see something that's actually being delivered, right? Again, like the proof is in the pudding. If nothing is out there to be adopted, we're just talking about the metaverse 5 years from now still, right? And that could be the worst thing for us, I think.
Yeah. That's the sad thing about standards. Sometimes some standards are developed. There are tons of standards developed, and they literally just collect dust. Why? And I think that's where Metaverse Standards Forum is different. We're sitting close to tech stack, and things that we do together is really to actually create adoption and not to just, let's make another standard or another standard. I think the question that you asked us, I'm going to wait to answer that question till 5th of June. Because there is an empty chair in this room. I always kind of imaginary, keep that empty chair. I'm like, when is Apple going to show up to these conversations? I spoke with one of their security engineers, and literally, he was like, let's talk after 5th. So we'll see.
Oh man, the suspense is killing me.
What's on the 5th? I don't know.
Okay, let's take some numbers on who thinks, what percentage do you think, if you had 0 to 100, of Apple releasing a headset on June 5th? Oh, nobody's going to take it? I would have said 75, but I heard some things maybe go to 80%, okay.
But one thing we know for sure, that they are releasing their Reality OS, because they've already established, the theme is Code New Worlds.
Yep. We'll have to see. Any other questions? I actually have a question for you. So, thank you for the update on IEEE. And IEEE is, and I'm a member. How do you see the forum, which is much younger and smaller than IEEE? How do you see the two organizations complementing each other? Are they different? I mean, can we help each other? How do you see that working out?
Well, definitely. I think the beauty is that the forum itself is not an SDO, but it's like a neutral platform to enable discussions, conversations among SDOs and the companies. Particularly, I think, collaborations among SDOs are sort of sometimes complicated. So, of course, we know there are one-to-one bilateral liaison agreement or liaison relationships, but it has been difficult to get multiple SDOs working together and particularly even discuss something, sometimes it's sort of tricky, those kind of discussions, those kind of outcomes should happen in this organization, this SDO or another one. So those kind of things are sort of not really encouraging the industry, particularly in terms of the SDOs to work together. But the beauty of MSF is MSF is sitting in the middle. It's a neutral organization, neutral to everybody, to companies and SDOs. So it's naturally hosting such kind of discussions, particularly collaborations and some exploratory discussions within the framework of MSF, rather than just having to work out those one-to-one liaison agreement among other deals. So I really love that. That's why I have been supporting MSF from the very beginning, and I will continue to do so.
Yes, and we definitely appreciate your support. You're right. You're right from the very beginning. So yeah, that's awesome.
I have to say one thing that's really amazing. I mean, just the fact that, I mean, we are a really small company compared to Adobe and even the IEEE and Khronos Group. The fact that we were invited to be part of this, and when you go to the Metaverse Stores Standards Forum's meetings, it's everyone from, you know, from NVIDIA and Adobe and these big companies that you're kind of like, oh, you know, but they're having frank conversations with people that are two-person startups, and they're actually doing stuff, creating stuff, and they're going, well, what about this? Oh, I never thought of that. And the conversations are just open, and I think that's the magic of this, is that we will get to these, you know, these, I guess, recommendations to the standards organizations fairly quick, because people that are building stuff are not necessarily the bigger companies. They're building, you know, giant tech stacks versus somebody who's actually building little projects using those tech stacks and maybe myriad tech stacks to get something done for a client or get something done in general. So I think having that ability for even a small company like ours to participate is magic. And I mean, we couldn't, you know, we couldn't even think to be part of something like this before the Metaverse Standards Forum. We were just too small. So.
I kind of want to add one thing. You just mentioned tech stack. And again, I'm maybe speaking more for myself, not necessarily representing Adobe, but I wouldn't be surprised if in a number of years, the tech stack represent the data and the way you interop is actually open source tech stack. And I think even big companies are realizing that there is a big part of the tech stack that is actually better to be open source, open, inspectable, maybe is more in terms of security and all sorts of that, and really play the game on, you know, what you can offer on top of it versus owning the whole thing, because there's a crazy burden. You need to deal with all the interop of all the kind of things. And I think we'll be interested to see who is going to start racing toward actually open sourcing piece of their tech stack. So I was like, okay, at least it's the one I like. Let's see if I can put it out there. Because it may not be sustainable, the idea that we have a truly metaverse and we have independent tech stack try to go top to bottom. So I don't know. We'll see, because again, big companies tend to want to have everything. But again, even that one is changing, you know, because they realize it's just too much to try to. And so this will benefit also the smaller companies that they don't need to worry about, oh, I got to go do the whole thing. I said, well, I can actually put some cool tech on top that makes the difference. And that's how they can and be visible into that pool where the data flows, because it's using open source data models.
Yep, I totally agree.
So along those same lines, as engineers, we tend to think we want to build these solutions, and that we kind of forget that there's the other side of this coin, which is the adoption, right? And not just adoption within tech, but adoption by consumers, right? Users. I mean, so
We don't need them.
yeah.
I record that.
It's already recorded.
So I definitely agree with Guido, like that we need to move up in the stack, I think, and then differentiate in different areas. Also, you know, atomicity and composability. If developers can't come into this space and build on top of that easily, then again, it's not going to see that kind of adoption. And obviously, we've learned lessons from the internet and the web on that.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, question.
Kevin Creel, Tirias Research. So one of the things, getting the content to the pixels, often in the runtime is game engines. Well, what's the relationship you guys have with the predominant game engine companies?
We compete with them. We built another engine. So, you know, where, you know, Unreal we see as kind of AAA gaming and Hollywood movies and like that super high-end PlayStation 5, beautiful everything. I mean, we can only aspire to be that. Unity's got mobile games and apps covered. We're working on a game engine for the web, and even the engine, the editor, everything's in the web. So you go on the web, you don't need a powerful computer. You just go on, you make your experience, you hit publish, and it goes to all devices instantly. So from a game engine perspective, we're trying to build a tool that other people can build tools on. So, but we don't really see it as competing in kind of at all, because we're opening new market. Brands can now go directly and have a full metaverse-like experience, a full 3D web experience on their website. And I predict by the end of this decade, by 2030, I would say at least 50, maybe 60% of all websites will have something 3D in them, whether it's a 3D object that you can spin or you can walk right into the website. So having an engine for that is why we developed the Metaverse engine in the first place.
Well, if I have to answer, but I was actually witnessing development of a game engine sort of thing. CNSR, was being developed, and I only have more like a security safety type of perspective. But when people are developing game engine, well, one is that sitting close to Metaverse Standards Forum would allow them to receive a more of a collaborative understanding of what policies should be applied. Simple example, we were helping another organization, VR Room, and they're like trying to build very engine-like platform. And likewise, this happened in CNSR as well. Just the bubble around the avatar creates safety for a person experiencing things. However, if you introduce too many safety, security stuff, when you have 40 people, then that's really too much for a person. But when you start to have like a, harassment, sexual harassment, these type of incidents, and there is more, that's when you make that type of decision. Now, Lyndon had me, I had to make those decisions, but when we are at Metaverse Standards Forum, we could exchange these thoughts and ideas and help develop those standard policy and guidelines. The bubble, should it be by default? Should it be 6 feet because it was COVID and we came up with the bubble idea or adopted that? So we thought about it. XRSI has the privacy, safety, security, framework, but we need to get granular to the extent that, okay, this is by default, you can enable it for friends, and it should be universal. So when you click those options, you have a very clean understanding. So game engines will benefit tremendously in terms of policies. We're just gonna, once we get to work and produce outputs, that's when the magic will begin.
I'll just add to that. I think one of the things that people maybe, like we have a game engine, sure, but the policies that we make, I mean, they shouldn't dictate what you can do with the game engine. So you may want to build a platform like VR chat where you can go in and swear at each other. I don't know, it's up to you. But you can build that on our platform, and we don't have that. But we also have a platform called the Mall, which is built on the engine. And of course, we had to put standards in and privacy and security and make sure that if you're not a registered user, you can't interact with other people and these types of things. So that was done at the kind of platform level built on the engine. The engine, we don't really restrict people, and Unity doesn't tell you what you can and cannot do in your game on top of that. It's the game's responsibility or the platform on top of the engine that's responsible for the safety security protocols.
Yeah, you use a keyword. So the responsibility is the keyword, and you're right. In certain contexts, it is the platform's responsibility to figure those things out, but it is certainly the engine's responsibility to facilitate the context so that we can provision those policies depending on the context. Like you talked about swearing, hey, Second Life. Like, I think those kinds of virtual worlds are legit and should exist, and we should be able to allow intimate adult experiences in the metaverse. However, automatically, we should not have 13 and below absolutely allowed. That check the box needs to go. Every game
engine's responsibility?
So we need an API that automatically detects. Yoti is an integration, for example, in Instagram. Automatically detects without losing privacy that you're dealing with a child. They won't allow it. So this is the kind of, unless you allow that integration and the facilitate that this kind of API is available, you can't do it.
Yeah. That's one of the really interesting things, and this is my ongoing conversation with Caviar, is that, so much good work is going on in trying to figure out privacy. Trying to find the attach points into the tech is an interesting part, because there's the regulations and legislation that hooks into tech. Is I keep asking Caviar, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do?
One one thing, I mean, going back to the Metaverse Standard Forum, the key right now is to make sure that whatever content is produced and generated and is being delivered to people can be, again, played on different engine. I mean, I see engine as a window into this virtual worlds. Now, the challenge is when the engine comes with the data, meaning Unreal because it's Fortnite or Unity because of that. That would be a complicated matter to sort it out, because then you will actually control not only how people experience it, but what do they experience it. But the first step is really to making sure that at least we have this openness that allows that if I'm looking through the window of Unity and I'm buying things and I'm experiencing, I want to look into the window of Unreal and I can still see the same and not like, oh, it's not going to work and it's not going to be there. But I can see that's going to be where a lot of the competition will play a lot in that space, because all of the game engine will want actually people to be in there, through that world. And at the same time, who's creating content is saying, actually, we want the opposite, where we want to create for many engine out there. Yeah. So it would be an interesting development. And again, once again, as like I said before, it would be interesting to see if at some point it's kind of tricky, right? Because the best would be an open source engine. Like Unreal has a lot of flexibility, I have to say. It's already kind of open in a sense you can see it. You can't really, it's not completely open source, obviously. But the challenge is how you do an open source engine, but is also economically backed to be good and sustainable. Because how can you do a completely, and that is where at some point we'll be interested to see if other big entities, even at the, I'm not saying government stuff because that gets a little complicated, but if there is actually a desire to really provide an open way of looking at things, an open ways where you define it and where you put it, versus people wanted to lock out, where, because then it becomes like, you have to have a passport potentially to go around.
So Guido, are you
interesting?
Are you announcing a
No.
Adobe?
No. I'm not announcing anything.
Alan, behave.
I'm just trying to look at what. I mean, some of those things are, some forces. Doesn't matter what a company wants to do. Sometimes there are forces beyond what a single company wants to do. That, again, some company have hardware, software, and it's so out there that maybe have a little bit of an upper hand. But over time, it would be interested to see if the demand will be so strong to say, you know what, if I buy this thing here, it goes everywhere, because I'm not going to buy it 3 times, because it doesn't happen in the real world.
I just want to add, sorry.
No, go.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just one quick point too. There's something about authenticity also at the engine level that, and I know Adobe, you guys are working at Adobe Content Authenticity Initiative. So Kai, it's very, very interesting and a very important initiative. Why I use the word authenticity? Because in a world where a lot of the contents is generated by artificial intelligence, human-generated content, the provenance, when it becomes sacred, and you really want to know. I mean, I was really hopeful about NFT being that kind of a vehicle to validate, authenticity and provenance, but Kai type of initiative, and that sort of a integration with platforms, engines is going to be so incredibly important from like an integrity perspective. Otherwise, you're just looking at massive, like on the fly generation of like non-reality. And practically we'll just stop trusting what we see if we don't have those integrity checking type of a mechanism and things embedded in the platforms and engines.
Matt?
Yeah, just a quick note on what Guido said. I'm totally in alignment with the concept of the game engines being open source, right? I look at game engines as a parallel to like web servers are to the web, right? Apache dominates. It's open source, right? There are still proprietary closed source web servers, but they don't hold substantial market share. And so the idea that a game engine can't be open source and can't be great, I think is, I don't see that. I see the eventuality that the game engines will become more open source. They'll decouple from the operator of the virtual world that it's built on, and allow, why do I want to, and there are different models, right? I'm not saying any model's better than the other, but I don't want to build a game engine. I just want to operate a virtual world, right? And and so having that ability to, and all of these game engines will have to adopt standards just like Apache uses HTTP, right? And then there's, we're going to have authoring standards like HTML, which like USD and glTF. So if we can start to decouple these elements from one another, from being vendor specific and go into a neutral space, obviously the forum is a neutral space for conversation. We're not building things, but there are a lot of complementary organizations out there that are actually building and designing specs, and right. And so I think, I mean, Neil knows this, but like open source is my every fifth word, right? Like this is the way that we need to go for this to scale and to be broadly adopted, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
To that point, actually,
Are you announcing that you're going to open source your engine?
if we can find funding for it, sure. I mean, we've spent 7 years building it. We would be happy to do that if we can get our, a reasonable return on our 7 years of investment. For sure, we would do that. But that's the thing is, there's been a lot of open source, Firefox, was it Mozilla Hubs, and there's been a few things that have been open sourced, and it seems to be that because there's no drive, there's no profit to be had on it. It just it lingers a bit, and they don't proceed. They don't go faster. And I mean, you look at Unreal Engine. I don't think they make their money from Unreal. They make their money from Fortnite. The money is mostly made from Fortnite, not Unreal. But Unreal is still a profitable entity for them, and so, like, would you open source Unreal Engine? I mean, it seems reasonable to do that, right? Should we talk to Mr. Petit? See if we can do it? No?
I mean, I'm going to, so there's a couple things. Both Unreal and Epic, Unity and Epic, they were both founding members of the forum. So they are participating in all these conversations too. And I kind of agree with what Guido and Matt and Alan are saying. It's always interesting to come back to reality and say, no standards organization, Khronos or W3C, and especially the forum, we can't force anyone to use any standard. Standards only get used when it amplifies someone's business model. People only use standards because they're going to make more money. And it's the responsibility of the standards community to make sure that the people that want to enjoy the networking effect of not having to do everything themselves and interoperating with other products and services out there in the market, they have that opportunity, and they can benefit in their business model to do so. That is the way that standards will always survive. And also, I just want to, there's open source and there's open standards. my pet thing, they're different and we need them both, but I think lots of the engines will be open source, but lots of them are going to need open standard specifications too.
Even the open source game engines, they still need funding. Like, Firefox funded Mozilla Hubs. Like, we still need some money to drive it forward. And if it doesn't have a way of making money, then it's some company or a group of companies, which is fine, paying for that. And that's what we've seen in the past with Microsoft. They've even actually Logitech open sourced OBS. Like, a bunch of things have been open sourced for that, but it keeps getting funded by those big companies, and they usually have some sort of way to extract value later on in the food chain.
Yep.
So whatever that looks like.
Okay, we have time for one quick question because we have Meta Traversal coming up at 11:30. I see the Meta Traversal folks are here. Hey, Ben. So one quick question. Yes.
So, I mean, I think it's interesting the way you guys are talking about the game engines, because this is the reality crafting we're looking at. And I built on Crytek for a couple of years, and I was at Xbox. The challenge I see with the open... Yeah. But these are the challenges I see. Like, Facebook went and spent $30 billion to kind of try and recreate Crytek 3 and had to shelve a lot of this. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of, like, the Web 1 crash and burns with this technology. But do you think it's reasonable to say that we could end up with some sort of interoperable universe of render engines? Or is it kind of looking more like we're going to have one or two that sort of beat everyone out?
If history says anything, we're going to end up with one or two or three top things. So you look at CryEngine was then became Lumberyard, which then was brought to market by AWS. They tried to make a go at it, couldn't find a profitability for the engine, and so they open sourced it. So it's now what is it, O3DE, and it's being used. So who's using it? I don't know, and I don't know any big titles that are being built on it. I heard a rumor that a couple of big titles are coming out on it, but what happens to an open source game engine if money's not being made on it? It just disappears, and people lose favor of it, and then it just just sits there and rots. So I don't know anybody using O3DE now, but I'm sure there are, but there's no profit.
Like I said before, I think the game will change when multiple game engine needs to poke at the same data. Like it's the same way now, Google, Chrome, and Safari, they like it or not, when you point to the same website, you got to figure out a way to make it consistent. And it's different than Unreal saying, I got Fortnite on Unreal and I got this other game on Unity, so then you're locked in. I'm not saying that go necessarily that way, but I think it would be a different thing where you're saying, I'm experiencing the same worlds just through different lenses, and those are the different game engines. That would put a tremendous pressure of those engines to align in some way and hopefully simplify for everybody versus like, boy, I don't care because the game brings the engine. And this is different. Like the metaverse shouldn't bring the engine along. I mean, depending on how you define metaverse, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to end. So we're going to end there. So thank you to all the panelists. Another round of applause. And thank you all for coming. I hope you all have a great AWE. In about 5 minutes, we're going to start the meta traversal demonstration. So please stay around if that's of interest to you. And see you over the next 3 days. Thanks.